So this next story, this segment I'm going to do right now, this is the prototypical segment that I think is some of the best stuff that we do. And it does terribly in terms of audience, but it is so interesting and it is so worth doing and so informative. Let's dig right into it. I told you previously that Joe Biden will be selecting Janet Yellen as his Treasury Secretary. And we talked about Janet Yellen's politics, and I pointed out there are things that should make progressives reasonably happy about the selection of Janet Yellen. There are things that might make progressives not so happy about Janet Yellen. But the big picture about Janet Yellen as Treasury Secretary is that anything that Joe Biden is able to get done with the House and Senate that he ends up having, Janet Yellen is not likely to stand in the way at all, meaning that she will not be the impediment to Joe Biden getting his campaign platform done. She's a relatively good selection. She's the first woman in that position, and she's a true economic she's an academic. She's an academic from the field of economics. She is also, beyond that, a really clever economist. And I was doing some research on her and came across an article that she published along with George Akerlof in the Quarterly Journal of Economics back in May of 1990. This is 30 years ago now. OK, and she published a paper about the so-called fair wage effort hypothesis. This is not just economics. It's social psychology and it's sociology, and it's brilliant and fascinating. And it just reinforces that Joe Biden is picking serious people. Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary is Steven Mnuchin, who was a hedge fund guy who lived in a hotel and drove a Porsche while he was getting his undergraduate degree, and then went and worked, in big finance, hedge funds, etc. Janet Yellen is a PhD in economics and has published scholarly articles and developed original ideas of her own. And the idea that she has developed in this fair wage effort hypothesis, this is, again, 30 years old, but it's talking about the rigor, academic rigor that Janet Yellen is capable of. The idea is the following. If your wage that you are paid falls short of your perception of what would be a fair wage for that job, you start to not work as hard and you're less productive. The idea of hiring someone else wouldn't work unless you can find someone who really doesn't understand how their wage relates to what would be a fair wage for the job you've hired them for. And we've actually observed this phenomenon. You often will end up seeing people with different skill levels doing the same job and getting paid the same amount. And they end up with almost identical productivity. Would be strange intuitively, right? I mean, you've got two people doing the same work. One is significantly more skilled in ways that are relevant to that work. But because of this pressure that Janet Yellen describes that exists, where you are comparing your wage to the fair wage, even if you are more skilled and you would be able to be significantly more productive, you will produce down to the level you believe is appropriate for the wage you are being paid. Very, very interesting. There are lots of studies in terms of people having a perception of the fairness of the wage they're being paid. One such study is Lawler and O'Gara, which you can Google if you're interested in this. And they did some really simple but well-controlled experiments where they would pay a set amount per task. And when they paid less for the same task, given equally qualified and skilled individuals, when you paid less, productivity went down. Now, if you're interested in this, we're linking actually to Janet Yellen's article in the description for the YouTube video on this story. But it's really quite elegant because it directly refutes a lot of really bad right-wing talking points about the minimum wage and wages in general. And I'll give you some examples of this. There's this talking point from the right where it's sort of like a reductio ad absurdum, where they say, listen, if we want people to have more money, and paying them more is better, why stop at a $15 minimum wage? Why not make it $150 an hour or $1,000 an hour? Just pay people, make everybody multimillionaires. Now, intuitively, we know that that's idiotic. And one of the reasons it doesn't make sense is that paying people $150 or $1,000 instead of just a reasonable minimum wage It would not be an equilibrium wage that makes any sense in terms of the cost of living, nor relative to other professions. It doesn't make any sense. But what Janet Yellen's hypothesis adds here is that paying somebody, saying, let's set the minimum wage to 150 or 1,000. It wouldn't be in line with a fair wage. If you survey people about what would be a fair wage for traditional minimum wage work, it's not going to be $150 or $1,000 an hour. It'll be much closer to the $15 an hour that's widely now being discussed. I'll give you another right-wing talking point that is implicitly debunked by Janet Yellen's hypothesis. If you increase the minimum wage, you force businesses to lay off employees and it increases unemployment. Well, hold on a second. If Janet Yellen is right, and the literature suggests she is, if you pay people less, you're making them less productive, which means you either need to pay them to work longer hours or you need to hire more of them to get to the same level of productivity. That costs you more as the employer as well. The other one you hear, which is similar, is you raise the minimum wage, you raise the price of consumer goods. Well, the same analysis applies. If you lower the wage and you make employees less productive as a result, you still need more employees, or you need employees working more hours to produce your stuff. You'd theoretically still need to raise the price of the goods that you are selling. So it's quite elegant, very interesting stuff. And again, read it. It's only about 8-10 pages if you don't include all of the charts and data at the end. You could read it in 10-15 minutes. But you will very quickly realize that we are going in the direction of having actual expert adults in positions of power upcoming. And we will have our political disagreements with them, but we should all be welcoming this after the fiasco charade that the Trump administration has been. Check out the article. Let me know your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. We'll take a quick break and be back after this.